they certainly weren't the sort of dolls a ventriloquist would use, the heads had similar mouths, wooden blocks that would have opened and closed to simulate speech. At least, they should have had. Almost all of them had had their jaw block roughly torn off, leaving nothing but jagged splinters between their cheeks. There were 23 dolls I counted in total, and only one of them still had its jaw intact. It was the oldest looking by far, and was a small clown doll. Its threadbare body was white and purple polka dot, with 3 pom-poms down the front, and a ruff just below the head. It had no woolen hair left, but instead there was a tall, pointed white cap on top. Its face was painted a pure white, and its eyes were shut, with black lines drawn across them. The only colour was a splash of red across the hinged jaw. A smile. Like I said, I'm not scared of clowns and I'm not scared of dolls. The thing was ugly, though. I was kind of relieved, actually, to have found some of my grandpa's old things that I would have no problem throwing away. Or maybe selling. They were definitely antiques, so they might have been worth something. In any case, I put the nasty-looking clown doll back in the box and closed the lid. I definitely closed the lid. I went back over to the Calliope.
I thought it was pronounced Calliope.
Sasha, you're back early. I thought you were trying to get hold of those police reports for the Harold Silvana case.
Tried and succeeded. They were actually quite helpful.
Oh. Well, good work.
So, do we know if it's pronounced Calliope or Calliope?
I have also heard it said as Calliope.
Seriously? By who?
Americans.
Ah.
As far as I can tell, there isn't a correct pronunciation, but they were originally named after the Greek muse Calliope, so...
Are people going to understand that it's from Greek mythology?
If they are working for the Magnus Institute, then I would hope so.
I've just heard it more often as Calliope.
Statement resumes. I went back over to the Calliope. There was no lock on the lid, or any switch that I could see on the outside. I opened it, and the keys inside shone as though they had just been polished. Now, at the time, I didn't know how a Calliope worked. I just thought it was like a weird pipe piano. I didn't know that there needed to be a blower working for the thing to play, and even if I had, I wouldn't have known where to find one or how to use it. By rights, when I sat in front of it and pressed the first key down, nothing should have happened. The 4 tall rows of brass whistles should have remained silent. Instead, there came a loud, howling tone from one of the pipes, and I almost fell off my seat in surprise. I remember once hearing that the sound of a steam organ could be heard from over a mile away, and when that shrill whistle sounded, I could believe it. I started to play a tune. My grandpa had had a piano once. It had broken years before, and he'd never had the money to replace it, but he had taught me the basics. There was one tune that, when I was a child, I always insisted he play to me. He never told me its name, if it even had one. I always used to just call it Faster, Faster, by way of a description. A cheery, upbeat circus melody that started out almost unbearably slow and gathered in tempo, getting faster and faster until my grandpa's fingers were a blur. He always indulged me when I asked him to play it, and now I played it for him. The wailing whistles were almost deafening in that cramped space. I knew I'd probably be hearing from the neighbors about it, but I didn't care. I just played. The tune got faster, more frantic, and I felt something building inside me. It was like final closure for the loss of my grandpa was just out of reach, and if I got faster, if I played with enough speed, I could catch it. trigger slipped, and the music abruptly became a discordant cacophony. I was never as good as Grandpa Nick. I sat there in silence for a minute. When I turned to leave, though, I saw that the old steamer trunk was open, and the clown doll lay on top of the pile, even though its painted eyes were still shut. It felt like it was looking at me. Its smile seemed slightly wider than before. I shut the trunk and climbed down the ladder. I didn't really think about the weird things in the loft over the next week or so. I had too much else to do. It was only when Josh was next round and asked me why the small hole into the attic was open that I remembered. I told him I had something cool to show him and got the ladder out. He was suitably impressed by the calliope, but freaked out a bit over the dolls. I didn't realize he was scared of them. He made me shut the steamer trunk almost as soon as he saw them, and kept looking over to make sure it was closed. I decided not to tell him about the first time it had popped open. He asked if I could play anything on the ancient steam organ, and so I sat down and began to play my grandpa's old circus tune. Again, I began to pick up speed, to play faster and faster as the whistles began to shriek. I felt a hand touch mine firmly, abruptly stopping the music. Josh stood there, shaking slightly, his face deathly pale. On impulse, I looked over to the chest of dolls, but the lid was firmly shut. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he didn't know, he just wanted to leave. Now. So we did. Climbed back down out of the loft, and I lowered the wooden trapdoor behind us. The next few weeks were unpleasant. I don't want to go into detail. Let's just say I discovered that Josh was just another asshole after all. Our relationship was already going through a rocky patch. It didn't help that in those last weeks he became moody, short-tempered, constantly on edge. When I finally found out that he had... it doesn't matter. We broke up. It left me pretty much destroyed, coming so soon after my grandpa's death. I just tuned everything out again. Eventually it was tripping over a box that did it. One of the ones I'd put all my grandpa's stuff into and never actually got round to putting in the loft. I decided to just get it over with. I guess I hoped a tidier house would give me more space to think. So for the third time I got out that ladder and climbed into the loft. It didn't take as long to store all the boxes as I'd thought, and within an hour I was done. I had been so intent on packing away all my memories that I hadn't even looked at the old steamer trunk. As I went to climb down, I glanced over, and I froze. The lid was open again, and the clown doll was on top. It wasn't looking at me this time. Instead, it seemed to be facing a doll I hadn't seen before. This one still had its jaw as well, and I swear, it looked just like Josh. Same tatty brown jacket, same old jeans. Its black woolen hair even did that flicky thing he always spent so long getting right. It was lying against the side of the box, and I swear, it looked like the clown was reaching for it. I slammed the box lid down and got the hell out of there. I bought a padlock the next day. Now, I've brought a copy of the police report I gave, because you have to believe me that I did not play that calliope again. I had nothing to do with what happened to Josh. I came home from the cinema about a week later to find that my house, had been broken into. Here, it's all in the report on the burglary I gave to the police. The front door lock was shattered and it swung gently to and fro. At first I ran into my living room, my bedroom, but nothing had been taken. The electronics, my jewelry, it was untouched. I felt my stomach drop as I realized, and ran towards the loft. Sure enough, it was open, the padlock torn from its hook. The calliope and the steamer trunk were gone. They questioned my neighbors about it. None of them had seen anything except for Mrs. Harlow next door, who said she noticed two people taking out pieces of red sheet metal and brass pipes. She didn't remember any details, just said that they looked legitimate. She thought I was having some things moved. The police never found them. I just need you to believe that, to know I didn't play the thing again. It wasn't my fault what happened to Josh. God knows I hated him enough back then, but I could never have called anything like that upon him. Not like that. I don't suppose you need me to tell you how they found him. 4 days later, dead in his room. His throat was crushed, and his jaw was torn clean off. The police never found him. I wouldn't have thought of it, really. Wouldn't have put it all together even then. Not if it hadn't been for the fact that in the last days of our relationship, Josh had broken down. He told me that he still heard that calliope music, far off when he was alone. And it had been getting gradually closer. I mean, they say you can hear one from almost a mile away. Statement ends. While I have what I would consider to be some natural reservations about a tale of murderous clown dolls, there are a few things that make me more inclined than usual to believe this statement. Firstly, as Ms. Denikin mentioned, she did provide a copy of the official police report into the burglary, which includes testimony from one Irene Harlow that appears to confirm Ms. Denikin did possess both a steamer trunk and calliope organ, so those at least existed. The death of Joshua Drury is also at least as mysterious as she made it sound. In addition to his jaw being torn clean off his skull, residual evidence indicates that his throat was crushed with some sort of rope, apparently woven out of thick wool. There was no evidence of a struggle or of forced entry, no DNA evidence of anyone in the room aside from himself. No one was ever arrested for the crime. When discussing this case, Tim said it reminded him of some articles he'd read on traveling circuses in Russia and Poland during the early 20th century. On a whim, I hunted down a few of the volumes he mentioned in the Institute's library, and sure enough, on page 43 of Gregory Petrie's Freaks and Followers, Circuses in the 1940s, I found a reproduction of an old black and white photograph. It shows a small group of carnival workers, a contortionist, a fire eater, two strongmen, a ringmaster, and an organist sitting behind a calliope. The photograph is labeled as being from 1948 and taken in Minsk, Russia. Only the ringmaster and organist are named, Gregor Orsinov and Nikolai Denikin. The name of the troupe was Tsark Drogrova, the circus of the other. The name rings a bell, but I can't find any other reference to it. Ms. Denikin emigrated to Southeast Asia 2 years ago, so was unavailable for any follow-up, but I'm sure there must be more on this somewhere in the archives, because I know for a fact that sitting in the Magnus Institute's artifact storage is a bright red calliophone steam organ. When I asked Elias, he just told me that the record of its acquisition was probably in the archives somewhere, and no one else knows anything beyond the fact that it was acquired somewhere in 2007. The keyboard cover is firmly locked, and scratched into the surface are the words, "Be still, for there is strange music." End recording.
Rusty Quill presents The Magnus Archives. Episode 25, Growing Dark.
Statement of Mark Billum regarding events culminating in his visit to Hither Green Chapel. Original statement given April 19th, 2015. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, Head Archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. Let's get one thing straight right now. I don't think I should be here. What happened was really weird, and I'm pretty sure it was illegal, but it can't have been actually supernatural, like ghosts and stuff. That's not real. No offense, I guess. I'm just here because I told Kathy what happened and she insisted that I tell your institute. She's more open to that kind of thing than me. Maybe that's why she chose to live with Natalie. Sorry, I should start at the beginning. Kathy's my girlfriend, Catherine Harper. We've been dating about a year and a half now. She graduated last year, but I'm doing a medical degree, so I'm not leaving London for another couple of years. She managed to get a job as a trainee teacher up in East Ham, so ended up staying as well. I've got to say I'm glad about it. I'm not sure how good I'd be at a long-distance relationship. Anyway, the original plan was to move in together sooner, but stuff didn't match up properly, and this was before she got the job, so she had to move back with her parents for a while. Long story short, I had to get a house share with some other med students, and she came up later, moving in with Natalie Ennis. I don't know where Kathy met her. They've always been friends. But I don't think she was at uni with us. She never talked about it if she was. Kathy grew up in London, so maybe they were friends from school or something. She seemed nice when I met her. Quiet, but nice. She was very serious, though. I don't know if I ever actually heard her laugh. Maybe she just didn't find my jokes funny. Who knows? She was religious, too. I've never had much time for God myself, and Kathy didn't either. That's why I was kind of surprised the first time I visited her new place and found a framed Bible quote on the wall. Can't remember what it was. Something about Jesus and faith. I don't really know Bible stuff. Kathy said it was Natalie's. She didn't mind her putting it up there in the living room. Kathy's nice like that, you know? Just letting people be themselves. Me and Natalie didn't get on. I don't know if you picked up on that. We didn't hate each other or anything like that. We just didn't have anything in common. She didn't really watch TV or movies, and I didn't know anything about crochet, politics, or God, which were pretty much her only interests. Kathy was always trying to get her to come out with us, and she'd just say no, which was fine by me. She always seemed happy enough, though, hooking me on to whatever she was making at the time, reading some boring book on the political history of the bonnet or something. That changed last October, when his mum died. I don't know how it happened exactly. Heart failure, I think? It was sudden, I know that much. And it hit her hard. I mean, obviously it did, it was her mum, but I think she lost her faith. The Bible quote wasn't on the wall the next time I went over, and when I asked Kathy about it, she gave me a look like I shouldn't bring it up. I didn't see much of Natalie after that. She was still around. I'd sometimes see her heading into the kitchen to get some food or tea or something. But apart from that, she just stayed in her room. So far, so normal, right? You lose your mum and it messes you up. That month was sad, but it's not what Kathy wanted us to talk to you about. No. It was what happened afterwards. It was after Natalie found her new church. It was Kathy who told me about it. This must have been about 2 months after Natalie's mum died. I must have asked how she was doing, if she was feeling any better. Kathy said that, yeah, she was. Apparently she'd found a new congregation and seemed to be getting some comfort there. She hadn't been crying so much at night, Kathy said, and hadn't been quite as prickly when she tried to talk.
Hallo?
I noticed that the Bible quote hadn't gone back up, though.
Vous avez
I
le
thought
mauvais
if
numéro,
she was
madame.
doing better, I'd probably... morning, just as the sky was starting to get light.
Wrong number.
She'd go... I thought if she was doing better, I'd probably see Natalie around more when I stayed with Kathy, but if anything, she seemed to almost completely disappear. She never seemed to be there when I went over. I'd see her leave in the evening and come home early in the morning just as the sky was starting to get light. She'd go straight into her room, ignoring us completely. When I asked her where she'd been one time, she just told me, church. I asked her a few more questions, but she stared at me in this weird way until I got freaked out and left the room. I joked with Kathy that her flatmate was turning into a vampire, but instead of laughing, she just got defensive and said that Natalie couldn't be a vampire. Then she started listing times she'd seen her in the sunlight before just kind of trailing off. I think we both realized how messed up it was if she could list the number of times she'd seen Natalie in daylight. Other strange stuff began to happen around the flat as well. The light bulbs kept blowing to begin with. Well, that's not entirely true. It always seemed to be that when we got in after dark, we'd try to turn on the lights and, well, nothing would happen. At first we just threw the old bulbs out and replaced them, but it kept happening. We checked the fuses, the sockets. Kathy even called the landlord to have someone check out the wiring, but it all seemed fine. The lights kept not working, though. Then I had a thought. The next time it happened, instead of changing the light bulb, I just tightened it. And just like that, it turned back on. The first time this happened, I was so surprised I nearly fell off the chair I was stood on. The bulbs hadn't been breaking. Someone had been unscrewing them. Not much, not enough that we could spot it, just enough for them to not work. I say someone had been doing this. There was only one person it could have been. For some reason, Natalie had been unscrewing all the light bulbs in the flat every chance she got. That was also when Kathy started to look so tired. She kept nodding off when we went out for dinner and would often zone out if we were watching TV. I asked her about it, but she just brushed it off and said she hadn't been sleeping well. It wasn't until she got so tired she almost walked out in front of a car while she was crossing the road that I finally got her to tell me what was going on. She said that Natalie had started staying home at nights, but she was so loud that it stopped her sleeping. Natalie would wander through the living room and sing in a language Kathy didn't know, and the tune was so discordant that it set her teeth on edge. Natalie would stop singing if she came into the living room, but would then just move to her room and the song would start again. Kathy even said that when Natalie did leave, always at night, there would still be the sound of movement from her room. Shuffling, thumping noises, and occasionally the sound of something being knocked onto the floor. She'd come close to opening the door so often, but could never bring herself to do so. It seemed to be louder when she was trying to sleep. Once she thought it had moved into the living room, but she didn't go out to check. So no, Kathy wasn't getting much sleep. She started staying over with me a lot, as she said she just couldn't handle living alone with Natalie. One night, she arrived at my house almost in tears. I took her up to my room and sat her on the bed. She stared at me for a few seconds, and I was about to ask what was wrong when she started to speak. She said that Natalie had tried to convert her. She had come to Kathy's room earlier that night, knocked on the door, very polite. She'd seemed cheerier than she had since her mum's death, and asked if Kathy wanted to have some dinner and talk. Now, obviously Kathy had wanted to discuss moving out for months, but she'd never been in a fit state, so she jumped at the chance. The dining room was dark. Natalie must have unscrewed the light bulb again, as the switch did nothing.
Well,
Slivers of moonlight coming Just
Yeah,
above
but
the lounge,
plan.
you see the table and two bowls
But
at
don't
either end. Natalie sat at one end and waved for Kathy to sit at
My
the other.
God.
Kathy had wanted to run, but didn't know quite how to do so. She said it would have felt rude, so she sat down and tried to eat what Natalie had prepared. She thought it might have been spinach, but if so, it must have been boiled for far too long, and all that remained was a stringy, limp mush. It was stone cold, and she could barely get through 2 forkfuls before she started to retch. It was so slimy. She pushed it away as gently as she could. She said Natalie just watched, not even glancing at her own bowl. Finally, Kathy managed to get the nerve to speak, and told her she wanted to move out. There was silence for a long second. Then Natalie had said she did as well. I'll admit I sighed with relief when Kathy said that, but she shook her head and continued. Natalie had begun to speak, longer and in more detail than she had for a long time. She said that she needed to move out, that she had a new home to be going to, a new family. She said that they were all going, that 300 years was a long time to wait, but she was lucky to have found it so close to the end. She said that it wasn't long until they were collected by Mr. Pitch. She said that Kathy could come too if she liked. She could be saved. It was at this point Kathy realized Natalie was talking about her church. She became very scared and stood up, telling Natalie thanks, but she wasn't really one for Christian worship. And Natalie laughed at this. Laughed long and hard, never breaking eye contact. She had said, "No, but you're a natural for them. You're worshipping as we speak." It was at that point Kathy ran and came over to my house. Natalie hadn't tried to stop her. At this point, I was angry as all hell. If Natalie wanted to join some weird cult, and by that point we were both sure that's what it was, then that was her business. But she was scaring Kathy. There was no way I was going to let that stand. I told her that I was going over to her flat and was going to have it out with Natalie. I don't know what I was going to do. I mean, I wasn't going to hit her or anything. I just needed to make it clear that you couldn't just screw with people's lives like this. Kathy told me not to go, but she wasn't in any fit state to stop me. I got in the car and started to drive. It was an overcast night, and without the moon the streets were dark. The lamps on the road seemed dull, and even my headlights didn't reach as far as I thought they should. It wasn't far to the small house. I didn't expect any lights to be on, but the silent darkness of the place still sent a shiver down my spine. I had a key to the door and let myself in. I'd taken a torch from my car, and sure enough the lights weren't turning on. The hallway was silent, but my nerves were on edge, and I started to look through each room in turn. Nothing. There was no sign of Natalie at all. I stood there, in front of her room. It just had a normal wooden fire door, but my hand still hesitated as I reached to open it. I knew it was empty. By now I was sure she wasn't home. Still, I was starting to feel that fear that Kathy had described. I saw that my hand was shaking. I tried to ignore it, grit my teeth, and I opened the door. The room inside was empty, as I had thought. But it wasn't just that Natalie was out. It was completely bare. No furniture, no possessions, nothing. The carpet had been torn up, leaving the bare floorboards exposed, and the wallpaper had been stripped from the wall. All of it had been stuffed and nailed up against the room's only window, leaving it completely covered. No light from outside got through, and the torch was the only reason I could see at all. I started to look around for any clue to what Natalie had been doing or where she had been. In the corner, Half slipped between the boards, I spotted a piece of paper. It was small and thick, and seemed to have something written on it. Picking it up, I saw it had 3 words on it. Hither green dissenters. The other side had a symbol of some kind written in thick marker pen. A curved line with 4 straight lines coming off one side of it, like a closed eye. I kept the paper, and your institute can have it if you want. It's not like the police were interested in it. I called Kathy to tell her what I'd found. She was worried about me, but also about Natalie. Whatever this weird church was that she'd joined, I think we both reckoned it might be bad for her. Really bad. Kathy wanted to phone the police, but I told her there just wasn't enough for it to be a crime. Not yet. I told her I'd keep looking. I might have lied, to be honest, and said I was just going to look around the house more, but... well, I did a search for Hither Green Dissenters, and it looked like there was an old abandoned chapel. The Hither Green Dissenters Chapel in a graveyard near Lewisham. I had decided that I needed to check it out. No idea what I was hoping to find. Enough to call the police in, I guess. By now it was just past midnight, and the drive down wasn't too difficult. There was still that thickness to the night, a heavy gloom that deadened all light, like someone had turned the brightness down on London. I found a parking spot not too far away from Hither Green Cemetery, and started to walk towards it. The iron gates